The gavel slammed down, echoing through the packed courtroom like a death sentence. Julia gripped Ava's hand tighter, her heart pounding as the judge announced the lawsuit against them for destroying the pristine image of Willow Creek Estates. But neither woman expected the bombshell that would flip the entire case upside down when their lawyer slid the documents across the table, revealing one of them secretly controlled the very real estate empire behind the exclusive neighborhood. The air in the Los Angeles County Superior Court felt thick with hostility. Wealthy residents from the gated community filled the gallery, their designer suits and pearl necklaces doing nothing to hide the disgust in their eyes. Julia Thompson, 32, with her neat bob haircut and sensible cardigan, sat ramrod straight, trying to breathe through the panic. Beside her, Ava Thompson, 34, kept her face calm, but her thumb traced small circles on Julia's wrist, their private signal that everything would be okay. Or at least that's what Julia had always believed. 6 months earlier, none of this seemed possible. They had stood under a flower arch in a small Napa Valley vineyard, exchanging vows in front of 30 close friends while the sun painted the hills gold. Julia still remembered the way Ava's dark eyes had shimmered when she whispered, "For the rest of our lives, no more hiding." They had both meant it. Julia, a high school literature teacher from a conservative Ohio family, had already lost her parents' approval the day she came out at 25. Her mother's last words still rang in her ears. "You're throwing your life away for sin." Ava, on the other hand, had always been the steady one. A freelance financial consultant who traveled constantly but always came home with takeout and flowers. Or so Julia thought. Moving to Willow Creek Estates had been Ava's idea. "We deserve beauty after everything we've survived," she had said, signing the papers for the sleek modern house with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the hills. The neighborhood association welcomed them with a fruit basket and a thick handbook of rules. No loud parties. No political signs. No disruptive lifestyles. Julia had laughed it off. "We're newlyweds, not revolutionaries." But the first crack appeared the day their pride flag fluttered from the mailbox for exactly 3 hours before a polite but firm knock came from the HOA president, Mrs. Eleanor Hargrove. "Darlings, we simply must maintain the aesthetic," Eleanor had said, her smile never reaching her eyes. Julia removed the flag. Ava said nothing, only kissed her temple later that night and whispered, "It's just fabric. Our love isn't." Julia's sister Claire flew in from Ohio the following month uninvited. The family had barely spoken since the wedding, but Claire claimed she wanted to check on her baby sister. Over coffee on the sun-drenched patio, Claire's mask slipped. "Mom cries every night. Dad won't even say your name. And now you're parading around in some rich people bubble pretending this is normal." Ava had stepped outside to give them privacy, but Julia caught the way her wife's shoulders tightened. That night, for the first time, they argued. "You always say we don't have to prove anything to anyone," Julia snapped, tears stinging. "But you won't even post a photo of us on your Instagram. Why?" Ava's answer was soft, almost pleading. "Because the world is cruel, Jules. I'm protecting us." Julia wanted to believe her. She wanted to believe the tension in the neighborhood was just growing pains. But the anonymous notes started appearing in their mailbox. "Think of the children. And this isn't that kind of community." Neighbors stopped waving. Invitations to block parties never arrived. Julia threw herself into teaching online summer classes, trying to ignore the way her chest tightened every time she drove through the wrought iron gates. Ava buried herself in work, coming home later and later with expensive wine and vague explanations about big clients. Then came the block party incident. Julia had suggested they host a small barbecue. Nothing flashy, just a few colleagues and the one neighbor who had been kind, a retired gay couple 2 streets over. The music was low, laughter genuine. At 9 o'clock sharp, 3 police cruisers rolled up. Noise complaint. Julia stood on the lawn in her sundress, cheeks burning, while Ava calmly spoke with the officers. The next morning, the formal complaint from the HOA landed in their inbox. Repeated violations of community standards, damage to property values, and inappropriate conduct detrimental to the family-oriented image of Willow Creek Estates. Julia read the letter 3 times, hands shaking. "They're suing us? For existing." Ava pulled her close, but her voice carried a new edge. "We fight this. Together." What Julia didn't know, what no one in that courtroom yet understood, was how deep Ava's together really went. Because the woman holding her hand wasn't just a consultant. She was the silent majority owner of Pacific Crest Capital, the private equity fund that had financed the entire Willow Creek development. Every mansion, every perfectly manicured lawn, every restrictive covenant had been made possible by Ava's signature on documents filed under layers of LLCs and trusts. She had bought into the fund years before they met, using inheritance from a grandfather she never spoke about. She had hidden it all because she had watched money destroy every relationship her mother ever had. Now, as the judge called for opening statements, Ava felt the weight of that secret pressing against her ribs like a second heartbeat. She squeezed Julia's hand once more, praying the truth would not be the thing that finally broke them. The weeks before the trial blurred into a nightmare of legal meetings and sleepless nights. Julia quit her summer classes. She couldn't focus on Shakespeare when her own life had become a tragedy. She spent hours researching HOA law, printing cases, highlighting precedents until the dining table disappeared under paper. Ava handled the money, or so Julia believed, quietly transferring funds to the attorney without explanation. "I've got savings," was all she would say. The neighborhood's hostility grew bolder. One afternoon Julia returned from the grocery store to find their mailbox spray-painted with the word "Deviance" in dripping red. The security footage showed nothing. The cameras had mysteriously malfunctioned that hour. When they reported it, the police took a report but suggested gently that perhaps the couple should consider toning things down. Ava's jaw clenched so hard Julia heard the click of teeth. That same evening Claire called again, this time on speaker so Ava could hear. "I'm sorry, Jules, but Mom asked me to testify. The lawyer for the HOA contacted the family. They want character statements about your lifestyle." Julia's stomach dropped. "You wouldn't." Silence stretched. Then Claire's voice cracked. "They're offering to pay my plane ticket. And you know how bad things are at home. Dad's medical bills." Ava reached over and ended the call without a word. The betrayal tasted like rust in Julia's mouth. She had always been the peacemaker, the one who sent birthday cards and remembered anniversaries even after being disowned. Now her own blood was choosing money over her. Ava poured 2 glasses of Cabernet and sat beside her on the couch. "We don't need them. We have each other." But Julia saw the flicker in Ava's eyes, something darker than anger. She had started noticing small things. The way Ava's phone buzzed at 3 in the morning and she would slip into the home office. The new Rolex she claimed was a client gift. The fact that their lawyer, Marcus Rivera, treated Ava with unusual deference, almost like a boss. The first day of depositions arrived under a merciless California sun. Julia wore the navy pantsuit Ava had bought her, feeling like an imposter. Across the conference table sat Eleanor Hargrove and 3 other board members, their lawyers polished and predatory. They painted a picture of the Thompsons as reckless influencers who had imported an alternative lifestyle into a family community, causing 3 families to consider selling and tanking property values. When it was Julia's turn to speak, her voice trembled but held. "We bought a house. We paid our dues. We wave at neighbors. How exactly are we destroying anything except outdated prejudice?" Eleanor's smile was razor-sharp. "Mrs. Thompson, this isn't about prejudice. This is about standards. Your little pride display, your loud gatherings, they send the wrong message to our children." Ava's hand found Julia's under the table, steady as always. But later that night, after Julia had cried herself to sleep, Ava sat alone in the dark office scrolling through encrypted emails. The subject line on the latest one read, "Pacific Crest Capital Emergency Board Vote on Willow Creek Litigation." She hadn't opened it yet. The betrayal that shattered the fragile peace came from the least expected place. Their neighbor, Dr. Michael Lang, the retired surgeon who had been the only one to invite them to his grandson's birthday party, filed an affidavit claiming he had witnessed disturbing behavior involving alcohol and questionable guests. Julia stared at the document in disbelief. Michael had hugged them both the day they moved in. He had told Ava his own brother was gay. "Why?" Julia whispered, voice breaking. Ava's answer was quiet. "Because fear is stronger than friendship when money is involved. Someone offered him something bigger." Julia didn't know how right she was. The HOA had quietly promised select residents priority in a new phase of luxury townhomes, a phase funded by the very fund Ava controlled. The circle of power was closing, and Ava stood at its center, invisible. As the trial date loomed, Julia began to feel the distance growing between them. Ava left before dawn and returned after midnight. Their conversations became polite scripts. One night Julia found her wife in the backyard staring at the city lights, tears cutting clean tracks down her cheeks. "Talk to me," Julia begged. Ava turned, eyes haunted. "If I lose you because of this, I don't know who I am anymore." Julia pulled her close, but the embrace felt different, like holding someone already slipping away. She had no idea the secret Ava carried could either save them or destroy everything they had fought to build. The courtroom on the first day of trial smelled of lemon polish and desperation. Julia sat in the front row wearing the same navy suit, now wrinkled from too many anxious hands. Ava wore a charcoal pantsuit that made her look every inch the powerful woman she secretly was. Marcus Rivera opened for the defense with calm precision, but Julia could see the strain in his jaw. He knew what was coming. The plaintiffs called Eleanor Hargrove first. She took the stand in a cream Chanel suit, every hair in place. "We are not bigots," she began, voice honeyed. "We simply ask that all residents respect the covenant we all signed. The Thompsons have repeatedly challenged that covenant with their displays." She produced photos, the pride flag, the barbecue, even a candid shot of Julia and Ava kissing goodbye at the curb. The gallery murmured. Julia felt her face burn. Cross-examination was brutal. Marcus forced Eleanor to admit that no straight couple had ever been cited for kissing in public. The judge sustained an objection, but the damage was done. Julia's own testimony came after lunch. She spoke of the notes, the police visit, the way neighbors crossed the street to avoid them. "We just wanted to live quietly and love each other," she said, voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "Is that too much to ask in America?" Several jurors nodded. But then the plaintiffs called Claire. Julia's sister walked in wearing the same dress their mother had bought for Easter years ago. She avoided Julia's eyes. Under oath she described growing up with a confused sister, the family's heartbreak, the way Julia had chosen this lifestyle over blood. "I love my sister," Claire finished, tears artfully falling. "But I worry she's being led down a dangerous path." Ava's hand found Julia's again, but this time Julia pulled away. The betrayal cut deeper than any neighbor's spray paint. During the recess, Ava cornered Marcus in the hallway. "We need to introduce the fund documents tomorrow." Marcus's eyes widened. "That will blow the case wide open." "Are you sure?" Ava looked back at Julia through the glass door, watching her wife wipe tears with a trembling hand. "I'm sure. That night the argument was worse than any before. You've been lying to me for years," Julia shouted, voice raw. "Every time you said, 'client meeting,' you were running an empire that owns half this neighborhood?" Ava stood by the kitchen island, shoulders slumped. "I was protecting you. If people knew I had money, they'd say you married me for it. Your family would have been even crueler. I watched my mother lose every friend when the inheritance hit. I didn't want that for us." Julia laughed bitterly. "Instead you let them sue us like we're trash. You could have stopped this months ago with one phone call. I didn't want to use the money to fight hate. I wanted us to win because we're right." The silence that followed was heavier than any verdict. Julia slept in the guest room. Ava sat on the floor outside the door until dawn, listening to her wife cry. The next morning the gallery buzzed when Marcus announced a new witness. Ava took the stand. She looked every inch the boardroom warrior now. Calmly, methodically, she walked the court through the corporate filings. Pacific Crest Capital, majority owned by A.R. Thompson Living Trust. The trust that had financed Willow Creek's development. The same HOA covenant she herself had approved years before meeting Julia. Gasps rippled through the room. Eleanor Hargrove turned white. Jurors leaned forward. Julia stared at her wife as if seeing her for the first time. Ava's voice never wavered. "I hid who I was because I was terrified that money would become the only thing people saw. But I will not hide anymore. Not when it costs the woman I love her dignity." The judge called for order. The plaintiff's attorney sputtered objections. But the documents were irrefutable. Outside the courthouse that afternoon, reporters swarmed. Julia stood frozen on the steps while Ava fielded questions with the poise of someone born to power. A single thought looped in Julia's mind. The woman I married is a stranger. Yet when Ava turned and reached for her hand in front of the flashing cameras, Julia took it. Because love, she was beginning to understand, was not about perfect truth. It was about choosing each other even when the truth hurt. The trial stretched into its second week, but the energy had completely shifted. The plaintiff's case was crumbling under the weight of Ava's revelation. Eleanor Hargrove's testimony became defensive, almost frantic. "We had no idea Mrs. Thompson was involved in the fund," she stammered. "This changes nothing about the conduct violations. Marcus destroyed her on cross." "It changes everything, Mrs. Hargrove. You're suing the majority owner of the company that wrote your precious covenants." Julia watched from the gallery, emotions storming inside her. Pride in Ava's courage warred with the sting of betrayal. Every night they returned to the house that suddenly felt like a monument to secrets. Ava tried to explain. The grandfather who left her the seed money, the years of building the fund in silence, the fear that wealth would eclipse their love. Julia listened, but the words felt distant. A new betrayal arrived via certified mail. Dr. Michael Lang had reversed his affidavit. In a handwritten note, he admitted the HOA had offered him a substantial discount on a new property in exchange for his original statement. "I was scared," he wrote. "I'm sorry." Julia read the letter at the kitchen table while Ava cooked pasta, a rare domestic moment. "He sold us out for a better mortgage," Julia said flatly. "Everyone has a price, apparently." Ava set the wooden spoon down. "Not everyone. I didn't sell you out. I protected you the only way I knew how." Julia looked up, eyes hard. "By lying for 7 years? By letting us suffer when one call could have ended this?" Ava's voice cracked. "If I had told you on our third date that I was secretly a multimillionaire, would you have stayed? Or would you have wondered, like everyone else, whether you were just another accessory?" The question hung between them. Julia had no answer. That weekend Julia's mother called, the first time in 2 years. The conversation was short and devastating. "We saw the news. Your wife is some kind of tycoon, and you let us think you were struggling. Claire is heartbroken." Julia hung up without speaking. She drove to the beach alone, sat on the sand until sunset, and screamed into the wind until her throat bled. When she returned home, Ava was waiting on the porch with 2 plane tickets to Hawaii. "We need to breathe," she said softly. "The trial will wait." "We won't." They flew out the next morning. On the private lanai overlooking turquoise water, Ava finally told the full story. How she had used her trust to anonymously fund LGBTQ youth shelters for years. How she had bought their house through a subsidiary because she wanted Julia to fall in love with her, not her balance sheet. How every late-night meeting had been board calls about developments that could either uplift or destroy communities. Julia listened without interruption. When Ava finished, the only sound was waves. "I'm angry," Julia said at last. "But I'm also proud. You built something real. You just forgot that real love doesn't need protecting from truth." Ava reached for her hand. This time Julia didn't pull away. They made love for the first time since the lawsuit began, slow, tender, full of whispered apologies and new promises. But even in paradise, Julia felt the shadow. The trial would resume in 5 days, and the plaintiffs have filed an emergency motion to dismiss Ava's ownership as irrelevant. The fight was far from over. Back in the courtroom, the atmosphere crackled with electricity. The plaintiff's new strategy was desperate. Paint Ava as a manipulator who had deliberately hidden her ownership to entrap the community. Their lead attorney, a shark in pinstripes named Richard Klein, called a surprise witness, Ava's former business partner, a man named Thomas Reed who had been ousted from the fund 3 years earlier. Thomas took the stand with obvious relish. "Ava Thompson is ruthless. She votes in secret, pulls strings, and destroys anyone who questions her. Ask the residents of Willow Creek how many small businesses she crushed during development." Julia's stomach twisted. She had never heard this side of Ava. During cross-examination, Marcus exposed Thomas's own financial troubles and pending lawsuits against Pacific Crest, but the seed of doubt had been planted. That evening Julia confronted Ava in their hotel room near the courthouse. "Is it true? Did you really force families out to build this place?" Ava's face went pale. "Some owners were bought out at above market rates. No one was forced. But yes, I approved aggressive expansion. It was business." "Business," Julia repeated bitterly. While I was teaching kids to believe in justice, you were playing Monopoly with people's homes. Ava stepped closer, voice urgent. I also approved the low-income housing project 2 miles away that no one talks about. I fund the scholarship program for queer students in your old high school. I'm not a monster, Jules. I'm complicated. The word landed like a slap. Julia realized she had fallen in love with a version of Ava, the gentle consultant who made perfect pancakes. The real woman was far more. The next day Marcus dropped the final bombshell. He presented internal HO emails proving Eleanor had known about Ava's ownership for months and had still pursued the lawsuit to force a settlement and drive the Thompsons out. The emails were damning. "We can't let them win," Eleanor had written, "even if it costs us." The courtroom erupted. The judge called for an immediate recess. In the hallway, Ava pulled Julia aside. "Whatever happens, I'm done hiding. If you want to leave after this, I'll understand. But I love you more than any empire." Julia searched her wife's eyes and saw the fear there. The same fear she had carried since Ohio. "I'm not leaving," she said. "But we're rewriting every rule when this is over. No more secrets. No more protecting me from the truth." Ava nodded, tears spilling. For the first time in months, the distance between them began to shrink. The verdict came on a Thursday morning that smelled of rain. The judge ruled in their favor on all counts, ordering the HOA to pay legal fees and issue a public apology. More importantly, he struck down the specific covenant language as unconstitutionally vague and discriminatory. Reporters surged forward as Julia and Ava stepped into the sunlight. But the real climax happened that evening back in Willow Creek. Ava called an emergency meeting of the entire neighborhood via the community app. Over 200 residents gathered in the clubhouse, stunned when Ava walked in wearing jeans and a simple white shirt. No power suit, no armor. "I owe you all an explanation," she began, voice steady. Julia stood beside her, hand in hers. "I hid who I was because I was afraid money would define me. I was wrong. This community was built on my vision, but it was also built on exclusion. That ends today." She announced a complete overhaul. New inclusive covenants, a diversity scholarship funded by Pacific Crest, and an open invitation for any resident, regardless of who they loved, to serve on the board. Gasps turned to murmurs, then cautious applause. Eleanor Hargrove sat rigid in the front row, face frozen. Later, alone on their patio under the same stars that had witnessed their first argument, Julia turned to Ava. "You could have crushed them with your power. Instead you chose transparency. Why?" Ava smiled softly, tracing Julia's cheek. "Because you taught me that real strength isn't in bank accounts. It's in choosing love even when it costs everything." They kissed under the moonlight, the kind of kiss that promised tomorrow would be different. Honest, messy, and entirely theirs. The lawsuit had nearly broken them, but it had also forged something unbreakable. Months later, Julia stood at the podium during the first Pride celebration ever held in Willow Creek Estates. Ava watched from the front row, eyes shining with pride. The neighborhood wasn't perfect, change never is, but it was evolving. And so were they. True or false? In the face of prejudice, hiding your true identity is sometimes the only way to protect the person you love most.